Okay. Hello, my name is Matthew, and I'm happy to be here with Ami. Ami, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, Matthew. It's great to be here to talk to you again. And it's awesome to be reading this book with you.
Yes, so we are reading Magic Mountain together, and there's a bunch of other people reading along as well. And uh, we thought we would just have a conversation and talk about uh, the beginning of the book. I think we're both around the first quarter of the novel, so we'll just talk about what we think so far.
Yeah.
And Ami, of course, I want to hear your thoughts.
So the part that's just been standing out to me the most at this point is obviously the tone. This is something that you've touched upon in the videos because it's so unique. It's such a unique and like gripping kind of tone, you might say. It's sort of dreamlike in a way, and it's been causing me to make all sorts of connections to like other books that I've read in the past that have sort of like an analogous kind of tone. And but I've been thinking like it's very different than the way that might sound. Like it's not like I read this and I say, "Oh, this feels derivative." It's not like I read this and I say like it feels like too similar to books that I'm familiar with. It feels like all those books are derivative from this, if that makes sense. Like this is like the most perfect distillation of the tone of like this dreamlike out of time, like liminal space, you know?
I do know what you mean. Something that happens a lot when I'm reading Thomas Mann is he tends to elaborate um, things very dense and very long. And if you spend the more time you spend with him, the harder it is to imagine that you could be any more concise. It
Mm,
seems it has to be sprawling and wide ranging and long to get the sense of the world that we're in.
yeah, yeah. And also in the beginning of the book, this theme of time that comes up a lot also has really jumped out at me. It's something that you talked about, the relativity of time. I find so fascinating, and like how Hans Castorp feels very strongly that there's like no objective time, and like even the measuring time by movement is as absurd as measuring movement by time. He says, you know, like to say that from city A to city B is 10 minutes makes no sense. And so to say that 10 minutes is the movement of the hand of a clock is equally nonsensical. You know, I love that.
I love like there's like these layered uh, sensations of time throughout the book. Right now, I'm like just like his vacation, his visit has ended, so the 3 weeks have passed, and I love that it takes so long and it feels so long for just the first day to pass, and then the whole rest of the vacation it accelerates until it feels like 3 weeks went by in the blink of an eye. And the character goes through that, but I feel like the reader does too.
Yeah. And it's so meta, right? Because Thomas Mann says it explicitly at one point. He's like, you know, now we're going to go much faster, or something like that, because that's the way time passes. Like he says that to us, you know, I think, if I remember correctly. And yeah, it's like the time dilation, the time distortion that happens in the book is like so amazing. It's like I mentioned before, like before we started recording, like I've been making a connection in my mind to Waiting to Godot, and I just wanted to like bounce that off you and tell and hear what you think, if like that makes any sense or doesn't make sense.
I think the connection with uh, obviously the time passing, but also the feeling of expectation or anticipation. There's something ahead of us that we're bending towards. There's an arc towards some goal, and uh, Waiting for Godot is a great example of uh, sort of the absurdity of relying on a future event. And in this book, we have Hans Kostorp, who is always in a hurry, at least at the beginning, isn't really living in the present moment. He has this idea of where he's going to be. And so his like trajectory to get there is in this weird timeless place. So I think it's a really interesting connection. I hadn't thought of it until you mentioned it.
I have one more connection I wanted to share with you and to see if it makes any sense. Have you ever read the book, Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss, the children's book?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
So it's like this very whimsical, beautiful book about like the things that can happen, all the amazing different things you could do in life. And so like, I have the text open in front of me on my computer. So it says, congratulations, today is your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own and you know what you know. And it goes on and on. You look up and down this street, up and down that street. But there's this one amazing part of the book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, which has always startled me and stayed out with me. And because again, I read this book as a young child and I visited it since then, but like from a young age, like there's this dark passage in Oh, the Places You'll Go, which sort of seems to come out of nowhere. And he says, you'll get confused, you'll start to race, and then you'll end up in a most useless place, the waiting place. And he says, for people just waiting for a train to go or a bus to come or a plane to go or the mail to come or the rain to go or the phone to ring or the snow to snow or the waiting around for a yes or a no or the waiting for the hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting for the fish to bite or waiting for the wind to fly a kite, waiting around for Friday night or waiting perhaps for their Uncle Jake or waiting a pot to boil or a better break, etc., etc. And so like, I just feel like this is the waiting place. It's like you fall into the state where you're just waiting for who knows what.
Yeah, I think one of the themes in the book is like we've been saying, time, but also the reflection of when a lot of time has passed, and when you look back and have that startled feeling of, my God, it's been a month or a year, and the next obvious question is, have you been idling, or have you been being productive, progressing in some way? And it can be really scary to think back and say, like, gosh, like I've been waiting around for something and not actively pursuing something. Like that really hits home on a very personal human level.
Have you ever been there?
In a children's book, because it's an incredible life lesson.
Yeah. Does that resonate on a personal level? Ever like wondered if you've been caught in the waiting place?
Yeah, that's my place of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I think I've told you that I work at a lumber yard, but I've been there for 8 years, and it feels like this eternal place where every day is the same. You go in and do the same thing, and to look back and realize that all that time has passed, and essentially, kind of like Waiting Godot with the 2 acts. Each day is the same day.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, for me, there's certain aspects of my life that do have that feeling, and then thankfully other aspects where I know that I'm becoming a better person or being productive in things. And I think everybody has either blind spots or areas of their life that can have improvements that that sometimes it's easier to avoid or ignore, and until you look back upon it and think, I have to do something about this. How about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I spent 2 years studying Talmud in Israel, and just the sense that I could have stayed there forever, like it was like Dr. Seuss says, you'll get yourself unstuck, you'll escape the waiting place, but it's like you could just stay there forever. And Yeah, I find it so interesting, and it's like dystopic. It's almost like I don't know if you're familiar with like Black Mirror. It's like a dystopian series, yeah, television show on like Netflix, but it's like describes these little dystopias, and like the idea that you could have your needs met, you could just be comfortable, and you could just wait it out. You know, like what is a life worth living? Like what is our time worth? Like if you could press the button and just be comfortable and wait, like would you press that button? You know?
Yeah, I think that's there's some fine line between whatever's supposed to happen at the point of happiness. Like if it's possible to reach the point where you've met all of your goals and you've done all the things that you want to do, what happens then? And then the other edge of that is not reaching those goals, but still finding your place of complacency.
Mm-hmm.
So is it just this like continuum of human pursuit, or is there a goal where you can finally rest on your laurels?
Yeah. And the other big piece that jumps out for me, like on every page of this book, is I read it, and I don't. This is not fully formulated. It's like it's not something I fully understand, and it's something that I hope to keep thinking about as I work my way through this book. But Thomas Mann seems to be grappling with something like much bigger than just this particular sanatorium. And like you mentioned, like we know the future. We know that they're on a trajectory towards World War One. But the sanatorium is constantly being compared to like other things, and the questions they're dealing with in the sanatorium are such big questions. So what's the doctor's name again?
Krakowski, Dr. Krakowski.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's him, who says that like there's one line. I think it's around the time when Hans Castorp gets his X-ray. He says all of Germany is a barracks. Is he the one who's constantly like making military analogies and like telling Hans Castorp to be like a good soldier and like always follow orders and things like that? But just this constant like analogy to like the military barracks. And also like Hans Castorp is he does engineering, right? Like he makes like trains or something, automobiles. And
Yeah.
Sedembrini's like obsessed with that, and he talks about like the moral evolution of like civilization as like we progress towards like he like makes this analogy between moral progress and technological progress, and it's like they're grappling with like modernity in like a really profound way. It feels like, and it just makes me wonder if like there's something in the modern world, which is like this sense of comfort of modernity, the sense of like being observed in the modern world, the sense of like you have your job, your 9 to 5, and your role that you do, which is just like symbolized by the sanitarium.
I think like even on the back cover of my book, it describes it as a microcosm of Europe, and I love how like it's so on the nose, but then also folds into the story really well. Things like his neighboring quarters is there's these two Russians that he doesn't like, and so like he's neighboring with Russians that he doesn't like, and then there's the Italian that he's like always like having these arguments with, and then the French woman that's speaking Spanish, and then like other things like there's a dwarf waiter, I think waiter, and Hans like turns to his cousin and kind of goes, "Look, there's a dwarf,"
Mm-hmm.
and his cousin goes, "Oh yeah, like what of it?"
Right.
Which is perfect. He's like, "Oh, okay, what's your point?" And you can see him like you can see Hans and even other people in the sanitarium, like the idea that they're all put into this place and they can all be different, but they have to get through the day. Like they still have to have their meals. They're going to go on walks. They can have disagreements, but it's a matter of getting along enough where like everyone reserves their dignity,
Yeah.
right? And I love that that symbolism is so apparent, but it doesn't feel cheap.
Hmm.
And you mentioned the conversation with the Italian Settembrini, I
Yeah.
think,
Celebrity. Yeah.
and Hans, and I found that passage quite affecting. So the, the 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 subject of the conversation was about the progress of humanity.
Hmm.
He brings up uh, advancements in technology and improvements on the efficiency of communication, and it's it rings with this sense of hope, optimism that with technology, especially looking back now over the past 100 years, we can see how um, changes can start to accelerate. So throughout all of human history, it's this sort of like slow ball rolling that can pick up steam. And so there's this hope of like, look, we're getting better and better, and things are going to get so great so quick. And there's a couple things I find it uh, depressing just in the setting of the novel where we know what's coming. Like we said, that the war is coming, um, but it's so relevant for uh, today in the past 10, 20 years where we've had huge leaps in how we're able to communicate with one another. And then, like, there's a big question today of if we add everything up, have we made a net positive or negative?
Yeah.
And it probably doesn't work that way. It's not that simple. Um, but because depending on which direction you look, things have either greatly improved or we have made serious problems that need to be counterbalanced. Um, so yeah, I mean that passage alone like has resonated with me for the past few days.
Yeah. 100%. And just to sort of maybe say what you're saying, sort of just in my own words, but really just to echo it, like for me, yeah, it's like the paradoxes and like almost the tragedy of modernity, where like the conflict, like there's like an ironic humor maybe to what's said, like an irony, I guess, not ironic humor, like an irony to what Senbrini is saying, because he's so optimistic about the moral development of society. And just like what you said, again, I'm just repeating what you said, but like the fact that it's all for, they're on this collision course with World War I, you know, and that's like you just said this, I know, but I'm repeating you. But like in the modern world, it's like the same kind of paradoxes and questions of like, are we really making progress? I love that. Yeah. Yeah,
And
totally.
I think just one other like nuanced point is like I read it today and I feel like it's so relevant. And the readers at the time that read it obviously had the same feeling. They're reading it after the war, and I just love that we're not talking about two distinct points of readership, but a continuum, and
Yeah.
that everyone from the first time it was published through the decades till today have had that same sensation, that same reaction to that passage.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
It's something that like that I keep talking about um, is a lot of the humor, a lot of the funny situations, um, that ironic tone that we've talked about, and um, for me, it's so much easier it's more enjoyable to have those kinds of conversations. Um, but the book is incredibly sad. It's a, I think it has a whole mix of emotions, but there's a tragedy just looming in every corner of this sanitarium. Do you feel that?
Yeah, it just feels numbing, like numbing and dystopic, and I guess it like opens my eyes to the sense in which like there's a kind of dystopia and numbing effect of modernity, which to some extent isn't true, right? Because I wouldn't want to live in any other time period. I'm not saying that modernity is a net negative, or I would want to go back in time to anything in the past, but just the fact that just to be aware, just to see the ways in which we're living different lives um, than we could be, for better and for worse, you know, and just to sort of think about like the way we're transformed by our environment, you know, and the modern regimentation of capitalism and you know these ironies that are at play, the book sort of being at play in our own lives, you know, progress and lack of progress and things like that.
So that kind of makes me think of something. Just yesterday morning, I read I read the biography of Cato the Elder by Plutarch. Um, and I like going back to those biographies. And uh, when we think of the present or the future or the past, and in this case, the past, uh, we can look at certain points in history uh, very ideally and romanticize the achievements or romanticize the era by only looking at the achievements. And so I was reading Cato the Elder, and he had a lot of uh, Stoic Spartan principles. He liked his life um, had a lot of success and achievement and notoriety, and he lived in a small house. He did his own gardening. He ate boiled turnips, and uh, there's a lot of romance that you can find in the Stoic philosophy. And as we learn more about Cato and find out that he was heartless, he was a tyrannical slave owner, he was miserly and greedy. Uh, he was eloquent, but he was also eloquent to the point of uh, being able to misguide and confuse people. He he uh, he worked and tried to stop the influence of the Greek arts, literature, medicine, science into influencing and affecting Roman culture, which we found out it was very good that it didn't happen, because his time was before what we would consider like the heyday of Rome, when they did take in all of those things. And the feeling that I'm left with is uh, the rosy picture that I have in my mind does not in any way align with the reality of significant drawbacks uh, to that time period. Um, and I think with the Magic Mountain, it Thomas Mann is very careful to have that fairy tale like quality, but to not hide any of the like scary or uh, difficult realities that pervaded the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if that made any sense.
I mean, it's complex. Like the texture of any given time period is so complex, and the mark of a great author or biographer is to capture that texture and that nuance and that complexity.
Right. So, like for ancient Rome, it's a really bad idea to think, man, I wish I could have lived in that time.
Right.
And even, I wouldn't want to live in the 1950s, which is still relatively recent.
Right.
I'm glad that I'm in my 30s now, opposed to in the 80s or whatever.
Yeah. And so maybe to be a little more precise in what I was saying earlier, for me, it's not about romanticizing the past or wanting to go to the past, but it's about understanding how we're products of the present, meaning how our life and our experience of the world is shaped by our current modern reality, for better and for worse.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like is going on so compellingly in this book.
Yeah, I think Thomas Mann is he's very clear in the, not the opening pages, but very early on in the book, to say that Hans Castorp is a very typical man of his time, but he's not mediocre. Like being average doesn't mean that you're mediocre. And he said something like, he's not a genius or an idiot, a genius and a fool. And
Right.
so we're not at any fringe of human society. We're looking at a really good representative slice of a man of his time.
He's like us. He's the everyman, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Can I just share one quote, which I love from the very beginning of the book, which I just, again, captures so much for me. It's from the train ride, because the book starts so strong. That train ride, right up that mountain is so amazing. So Thomas Mann writes, space, like time, gives birth to forgetfulness, but does so by removing the individual from all relationships and placing him in a free and pristine state. Indeed, in but a moment, it can turn a pedant and a Philistine into something like a vagabond. Time, they say, is water from the river Lethe, but alien air is a similar drink, and if its effects are less profound, it works all the more quickly. I just love that, and I feel like that's such a perfect distillation of what the book does. Drinking from the water Lethe, forgetfulness, cutting off your ties, just falling into this vacuum of of the sanatorium.
Yeah, it's great. I love that. And that must be the James Woods translation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I do agree. I absolutely love, just like you said, I love how strongly the book starts. Sometimes with these great big books, especially, and these great big books, there's this like really slow tick up the roller coaster before it starts really going. And Thomas Mann kind of does away with that altogether. He just like hits the floor running, and within like a page or two, we're at the sanitarium, and we know everything that we need to know for this story to start. And then we get some backstory. We can learn more about Hans's life as far as specifics, but within the first few pages, we know so much about him just by his behavior. Like you can learn so much about a person by what kind of commuter they are.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, have you read anything else by Thomas Mann?
No.
Okay.
First time. Yeah. How about you? What have you read?
I've read most of the big books, which would be Buddenbrooks and Dr. Faustus. I read maybe half of Joseph and His Brothers.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember watching your videos on it. Yeah.
That was the first. That was the first time that. It was the first time that Thomas Mann didn't feel like a really welcoming guide. I feel like his books, although they can be long and complex and have difficult ideas, I always feel like Thomas Mann is a really safe guide through the story. And Joseph and his brothers just had too many things working at my own disadvantage for me to hold his hand all the way through the book. And then I've read some of his short stories, but there's a great deal of him that I still haven't read. Okay, I feel like we talked about a bunch of stuff. We can kind of wrap up.
Totally.
So I guess anyone that's watching, please let me know, let both of us know what you think of our thoughts, and also how you're getting along with Magic Mountain up to this point. And I think that's all I have to say. So goodbye from me. And,
Goodbye.
And leave a comment if you'd like, and take care. Bye.
Take care.